I want to show you today's flight that we did from Spaceport, Indiana. We were at a Knightstown, Indiana elementary school. And it's WB8ELK-13. I wanted to show you all how that Iridium modem turned out. I'm going to pass the Iridium modem around. So I'll start out with you, Doug. And this is that battery pack I mentioned from Adafruit.com. They're kind of in sync with SparkFun, but a different company. They kind of share products. I don't know if they're exact competitors or not. Now, if you zoom out a little bit, Zach, and go with a tail length of about 6 hours, I'll show you the whole flight. We can zoom. Okay, you ought to zoom in a little bit. The neat thing about the Iridium, zoom in just a little bit more. Okay, it took off, went up here, caught the stratospheric winds, kicked west, landed here, and then I watched it drive home. Because the students picked it up and they didn't know where to disconnect the batteries from it. Now, if you zoom in, Zach, at this point right here with the satellite map, I'll show you the interesting place it landed and see if you can guess what kind of a place it was. Yeah, zoom right in on that last dot over there. Now, usually I have a tree sensor on all balloon payloads. It finds the tallest tree possible. I can be out in the plains of Colorado, and if there's one tree out in the middle of a 1,000-acre field, you know where it's going to land. It's magnetic. So the tree sensor was off in this particular case because I wasn't there. I wasn't present. But it landed just right next to the parking lot of this big factory. And I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out what it was. Turns out it's a plastic factory. That's the Berry Plastic Factory in Richmond, Indiana. So easy recover, they went right to it. One last thing, track call sign UAH010. We do UAH for University Alabama Huntsville 010. And they kind of tend to put that kind of a flight number on it, and then they put the call sign in the comments field. I wanted to zoom out and show you the very interesting close call we had on last April's launch. Anybody recognize what that is? That is less than a mile. Now, when I did the prediction for the students, I said, now, I will warn you, there is a possibility of an interesting close call, but I will give any student that makes a hole-in-one extra credit. And you have two choices. But be aware that if you do that, you're going to have several government agencies very interested in you. Now zoom out just a little bit and I'll show you where it actually landed. Just scan over to the left. So we were very close to it, but it landed in a cemetery. And this is the border to the nuclear plant right there. That's how close it came to being on their property. It would have been a very difficult recovery, and lots of, like I say, government agencies. Now, the sad thing is, this is all nicely mowed. It landed in brambles, 20 feet deep of thorns. We sent the students in. There's a lot of yelling and calling, and they finally came out, and they were pretty scratched up, but they were happy. All right, we'll go on with the talk now.
Okay, you've got multiple PowerPoints in here. Which one is that?
Oh, the PPX. I just sent you two different extensions just in case you had an older PowerPoint. I'm going to pass these around. These are called the PAVA board by Anthony Stirk, M0UPU, and I'll pass those around so you can see how they work. Now, he generally does upper sideband, and it kind of drifts, so you have to keep following it. I AM modulated them, and it's much easier. Actually, those I FM modulated, so you don't have to worry about the frequency drift. And Pat, that little $4 SparkFun module, it's a little tiny board with a little silver cube on it that's a saw oscillator. It is notoriously drifty. It'll drift all, like, I don't know, 100 kilohertz maybe.
It's hard to keep up, at least 10 kilohertz or more.
Well, it stands out in the spectrum with
Right. But
Dongle Pro.
yes, so it's about 10 kilohertz to 15 is what it typically, if you insulate it well, it'll go about 10 to 15 kilohertz up and down the spectrum. I turned it on and off at 1,000 times a second, and you get an AM 1,000 hertz tone. And I made teletype out of it by 2 different tones, and it doesn't drift at all because it's AM, and that's what we use to use those particular modules. They work pretty well. We've heard them 120 miles away or more. And they only put out 10 milliwatts. All right, next slide.
I think you've got a clicker up there.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, here we go. This is the Pico Tracker that I've been passing around that we, by Anthony Stirk, 434 megahertz. It uses either the U-Blocks Mach 6 or 7 with the chip antenna. And it's an Atmel 328 processor, which we can program with the Arduino IDE. Now, you'll note there's a little programming header up there. Where's the laser? Yeah. This one, believe it or not, you can take an Arduino IDE and use ICSP to program it. You don't have to use the serial port. If you do that, however, the bootloader is no longer functional. But this gets around the problem of sharing the GPS with the serial port when you're trying to program it from one of those serial port dongles on Arduino. And there's a couple of different, email me if you want to try and do it this way. There's a number of things you have to set up in the init files for the Arduino IDE to make this work. Anthony in Great Britain told me how to do it. So it gives you, and you can go back and forth. There's a little step that you can do once you set it up. All right. Let's say you're at a birthday party and you have a bunch of kids there, and that's my brother and my 5-year-old niece. Actually, she's 6, isn't she? So that's Holly. That's my brother, N8UEJ. That's Jeff. We're in Cincinnati, and we had all these party balloons. We had about 100 party balloons. Now, the kids got rid of about 50 of them after the party, but there were still 42 balloons left. And then the question was posed, how high can 42 party balloons go before they pop and come back down? So that was she came up with that, and that was her question.
I thought you were launching her.
The answer is, I almost did. The answer is 4,200 feet and 11 miles downrange. It took about 30 minutes to go to 4,200 feet. A couple of the balloons popped, and it came back down just the same descent rate as it went up. And we went out after it the next day. The batteries were dead, but I could track it almost to the point where it landed from his balcony using Domino EX. And we pegged it down next to this power plant in this cornfield we didn't know where it was exactly. We got there, we knew we were within probably a few hundred feet of it. Well, of course, the balloons had deflated by then and fell between 2 rows of corn. And if you notice, the red ones and the yellow ones are on the bottom. The corn-colored ones are on the top. And we were scanning Bev, KK4RPQ. She's sitting over there. I was convinced that it was in this little area that was a little tree farm. And I was walking up and down little rows of trees, and she said, well, Bill, what about that cornfield over there? I said, well, I don't see anything. So I took one last look, and I saw a little bit of green that was slightly less corn-colored than should be, and walked out and got it. Now, this is what we've been doing lately. You've probably seen the flights that have been going on in Great Britain and Europe and Poland. And they've been flying Mylar balloons. You can buy these balloons. They're 36-inch in diameter. Don't try it with 18-inch or 24-inch balloons. It's not big enough. But you can buy these for $6 a piece. I get them from a company called balloonsdirect.com. And they'll ship it to you in a box. And $6. Now here's the cool thing. You fill it up with one of those little party balloon tanks. Believe it or not, they're actually claimed to be 99% pure helium in those little party balloons. And you can fill 3 of these up with one of those $22 helium tanks. Now, the really neat thing is they're light. They look like a little propane tank. You can carry in one hand. Now, if you want to do a classroom or a ham fest and you want to do a demonstration that doesn't require hauling your hydrogen 200-pound tanks around and all the equipment, you can do quite a nice little demonstration with one of these little transmitters and a single balloon, and your cost is under, well, $20 for the tank and $6 a balloon, plus the electronics that are dangling below it. So it's a very inexpensive way to show real science, because the neat thing is these balloons float. If you hit it just right, they will float for days. Here's an example of a couple other designs. That's the one I just showed you. That's the latest version of Anthony's Rev 9. He calls it a PAVA. This is Thomas, KT5TK of the South Texas Balloon Launch Team. And he's come up with what he calls the Pecan Pico 4. And it's pretty densely packed, but that generates APRS. Now, I think he's probably running about 20 milliwatts. How far do you think? Do you think 20 milliwatts on APRS would work when you're competing against 50-watt ground stations and mobiles? Believe it or not, it does. My first prototype board was running 10 milliwatts. I ran around town in my car, and I hit quite a few digipeters. It's all in the matter of timing and finding the clear spot when other transmitters aren't transmitting. And if you transmit enough, you're going to hit digipeters. And particularly when you're flying at 20 to 25,000 feet where these level off, you can hit quite a few digipeters with 10 milliwatts on APRS. Now this is a really neat one. Leo Bodnar, M0XER, and he's also in the UK, has developed a rechargeable mini balloon satellite. It weighs under 13 grams with the battery and can operate on APRS as well as digital modes. So he can't operate APRS in the UK. They have this law that you can't operate ham radio transmitters from balloons. It's probably a holdover from World War II. And so what he does is he uses multi-mode transmission. You can fly on 434 megahertz, sending down multi-mode kind of teletype or domino or one of those weak signal modes. Once it gets beyond the airspace of the UK, then he switches it over to APRS. But it flips back and forth. He's been running all kinds of modes like Contestia and all the HF modes that you hear on the air. And he has done amazing things. But if you get it down that low of weight, and this is a completely rechargeable system that lasts for weeks. He's got a little 100 milliamp hour lithium poly cell, and these solar cells charge it up during the day, and it's enough to power it during the night. And how far do you think that would go? Let's say if you kept it floating for 8 days. That's what it looks like. It just goes up to, this particular one went up to 13,000 meters, so it was in the jet stream. And it's pretty steady. Once it gets super pressured, the trick is not to put enough helium in to blow it up. You got to hit it, the solar peak in the afternoon is what you have to get through. But if you get it just right, and he just puts a few grams of lift, positive lift in these things, you can get it to float for 8 days. Now, let me show you how far he went with this. Some of you have already seen this. Can you see the map okay? Actually, can we kill the lights up there a little bit? Yeah, that's better. Can you see the countries? All right. That's the UK. That's Romania. That's Russia. That's Mongolia, China. That is Pyongyang in North Korea. He overflew North Korea at about 25,000 feet. And the last it was heard was northeast of Japan by a Japanese APRS station. 8 days on a party balloon. Now, I wanted to figure out how to do this as cheaply as possible and as light as possible. So I came up with this system that weighed in at 13 grams. And it is one of those SparkFun $4 transmitters, an Arduino Mini, which looks like, remember the basic stamp? That Arduino Mini is kind of a version of that you can program with Arduino. That's the GPS antenna, a little prototype board from Anthony with the U-blocks. And I just basically AM modulated that in teletype. And I put a power film solar cell at the bottom. Now, obviously, it doesn't work at night, but it works great during the daytime. And no batteries.
And no insulation?
And no insulation. I just tied a string to it and let it go. And here's an example of another flight we did from the Bowling Green, Kentucky Ham Fest as a demonstration. We had quite a few people gathered around for this. And that's all we need for a ground station. That'll get us out 60 miles or more. Just my netbook running DLFL Digi, 5-element aero antenna, and that's all the bigger the balloon system is. And this is a flight, one of my first flights we did from my backyard, and we could hear it out to the Alabama-Georgia border, about 70 miles away. Then the sun went down. The next morning, a fellow in Atlanta copied it, told me he could hear it over Atlanta. And then he lost it later in the day. And this fellow, he designs solar cell installations. And he looked out in his backyard and he saw a solar cell sitting out there and says, how'd one of my solar cells get in the backyard? He walked out and saw my reward sign, my backup recovery system. And 400 miles, Waukesha, North Carolina, which is near Charlotte. And probably a 20-hour flight.
But there are trees there.
I missed the trees. The tree sensor was off. All right, our latest activity, there was something called the Global Space Balloon Challenge. Did any of you hear about that? So we decided to put together a fun flight in a week's time. We just threw something together. And this is Kurt Haskell, KK4THV, Gary Dion, and 4TXI, and myself. Kurt is a master modeler. He does those micro miniature airplane models. And I said, can you build up a paper airplane and make it as realistic of a paper airplane as possible? And that's what he came up with. It's like 3.5 feet long. The little transmitter I sent around is in a little balsa wood box. And he's got tape, and he did have 2 carbon fiber rods on it. But it's a traditional paper airplane. And we used that board, which that's one of the boards that's passing around with the battery pack. And we used the Arduino. Now, I demonstrated that you can use the Arduino as a tracker. The neat thing about the Iridium system is it's a 2-way system. Unlike the Spot, which is 1-way, downlink only, you can send commands to this via email. You can actually email this module and say, I want it to do this, if you program it in the software. So we sent the command to release the paper airplane via an email command to the Iridium modem. And let's see if this works. Can you click on the picture? If it doesn't work, I have a video file.
It's not letting me click on anything.
Okay, won't do a mouse click on it.
Just stay right next to it.
All right, I'll,
You want me to flip over to the video?
yeah, go ahead, if you could flip over the video real quick. It's on one of the files in that directory. No, it's paper plane drop.
Drop test?
Yes. What we're going to do is send an email to the Iridium satellite network in Arizona, which goes up to the satellites and to the receiver in this box, and let's see what happens to that plane. I'm sending the email now. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So it went several thousand miles to drop a payload that was standing just a couple of feet from me. You might as well go and do that video too. That's called the paper plane launch edited, the edited version. Yeah. I wanted to show you, since the paper plane was dangling on one side and we didn't have any counterbalance.
Taking
What
video?
happened after we took off. And we had a camera on this. I was trying out a new cheap camera and it failed on liftoff. So we didn't get any video during the flight, but it's probably a good thing after you see the video of the liftoff. So we had it on about a 3-foot pole hanging with a little servo that would drop, that would move and drop a paper clip. It actually had a paper clip on the plane. Now watch the plane and see what it does. Circled like a satellite. That would have been amazing video. Requiring Dramamine. Okay. All right, now I can go to the next slide here. This is the 2 flight paths. This is the main payload with the Iridium drop mechanism. And this is where the paper plane released. It followed the path, but the plane was a couple thousand feet below the main payload at 64,000 feet. Right about 32,000 feet, the plane caught up with the main payload and went above it. It started flying. So it actually stayed up 12 minutes longer than the main payload and landed 5 miles to the south. And we were copying the teletype telemetry from that throughout the duration of the flight. This is where the main payload landed.
Oh, that kind of a tree.
Yes, yeah, we found a tree, all right. And this, it was 1,000 feet out in the woods, and Bev, KK4RPQ, and a couple of the other chase guys walked way back in the woods, looking way up in the trees, when all of a sudden they saw it right at their feet. Somehow it made it through very dense woods all the way to the bottom of the forest floor. And it was in great shape. It didn't even look like it had flown. The nose was crumpled just a tiny bit. So there's the successful team bringing everything back. Anyways, with that, I'll see if anybody has any questions. And yes, Paul.
The Iridium Northern reference, what's the cost? What's the monthly fee on that?
Okay, the Iridium is approximately, the cost for the board is going to be somewhere between $400 or $500. I'm still about to finish the layout. I'm integrating the Atmel processor onto the main board. The problem is that Iridium antenna itself costs $70, and that is one of the secrets to make it work so well while laying on the ground. They have patch antennas, but that requires you to orient it up. But this, it's a helical antenna, and it works great. I've had it work dangling in a tree upside down and flat on the ground. In fact, today's flight was just laying flat on the ground, and it was still transmitting up to the network. The subscription cost is $16 a month, but you get 12K of data free for a month. And that's quite a bit of data. I use about 60 bytes for a full-length telemetry string. You can compress that if you send binary data. I've been sending ASCII because it's just easier. But if you can press it down to probably 30 bytes of binary data. And you can send quite a bit. I usually set it up for 5-minute intervals, but you can do as much as 1-minute intervals with the system. And what I did with this, it sends you an email, I then wrote a basic program in, anybody heard of Liberty Basic? It is like the old GW Basic with Windows attributes. It's a $40 program. It's got a little cult following, and it's ridiculously easy to program mega stuff like TCP/IP and all that neat stuff. They have routines for it, and the program does not end up being 100 megabytes long. It's only like 10K of program to take the email, parse it, and send it to the APRS server and display it just like it was a ham radio APRS signal. So I have a laptop running, or my main computer. I run Mozilla Thunderbird as my email client, and I have it stored, make sure it stores the emails on my hard drive. And you have to use a POP client to do that. There's a choice. And then you set up with the basic program, you find where the emails are, and then you parse it and send it out. You have to reformat it into APRS. But it's taken me a while to do that, but I finally got it working, and it works really well. So, yes, sir.
GPS engines nowadays are using the U-blocks, is that?
Well, my two favorite GPS engines now are the Trimble Copernicus, but you have to know how to set it up right. Along with Copernicus likes to have an active amplifier and a helical antenna to work really well. So I have a Serentel. I got a bunch of them before Serentel went belly up, and it works great. I've been really thrilled by that, and it handles really bad RF environments with that system, but it's bigger. The U-blocks with the chip antenna, don't expect the kind of performance that you do on that, but it actually, it takes a few minutes to lock in, but once you get it working, it works great. And they're very tiny and very lightweight.
Can you get those from the UK?
Yes, well, you can buy them here, but unless you buy 100 of them at a time, you aren't going to get a good deal. So I get them from Anthony, and he doesn't mark it up very much. So there are places you can buy them on eBay. I've seen them on eBay. You can buy them direct from Hong Kong. Any other questions? With that, back to you, Zach.